for our Wednesday show. We're still looking down south. It's getting into tropical weather season. We've got Invest 97, which has moved a little bit west, and 98, which has moved a little bit west also. There's the 5-day tropical weather outlook, so we're expecting some development in the Caribbean and the southern Atlantic, and here's a new one moving off the west coast of Africa. And here we've got the current position of Invest 97 with the spaghetti numerical model tracks still taking it mostly into the Yucatan. We have this outlier. This is the Canadian ensemble mean, which is way out towards the east. But anyway, it looks like we're definitely looking at something in the central or western Gulf. That's going to be sometime next week. And here we have the track for Invest 98. That's pretty much heading where we said yesterday. The effects will be mostly in Cuba, but I can see maybe a very slight northward jog on that track towards southern Florida. For the Caribbean storm, 97, we just look over the intensities real quick, and it's keeping it just in the tropical storm range. Just a few outliers here. That's from the statistical models. And we know that that's an area of high shear that storm is going to be working with. And then the plots for 98 at the 4 to 5 day point, some of the models coming up into the hurricane range. That's the very low end of hurricane range, yeah. And it looks like some of the dynamical models keeping that in the tropical storm range. And it looks like it's the statistical models mostly that are pushing it up into hurricane strength, except for this HMON numerical forecast system there. NavGem also picking that up to 72 knots. So we shall see. We know that shear's been a problem up in that area too. And there's a quick look at that shear product showing that a lot of it is centered over the northern Caribbean, all the way out towards Dominica and Puerto Rico. But if this area of weaker shear can hold together in the 4 to 5 day range, or if it can advect eastward a little bit, then we could see intensification on that 98 invest. So, we'll see what happens later on. This is probably not the time to be making definitive predictions of what's going to happen. Here we have the upper level pattern across North America. Anticyclonic turning of the winds right there in California. It looks like that's centered pretty much right over Death Valley. To the north of there, we got progressive westerly flow, becoming very strong northerly across Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas. If we had a little bit more moisture, this would be a great northwesterly flow regime. But I can tell just by going outside that our dew points are way down here. Pretty good trough moving through the mid-Mississippi River Valley into the Dallas, Texarkana area right there. And let's see, what else do we got? Pretty strong upper level ridge from Wyoming up to Saskatchewan, and the polar front jet running like that coming onshore in British Columbia, and then looks like we build up another segment kind of like that right there. That's going to be a polar front jet. Things are a little bit cool on the Great Plains, so we've got some baroclinicity in place. And then out ahead of it on the east coast, another jet right there, 90 knots off the coast of New England. Any other subtropical highs, that's what we got to be keyed on this time of year. And it looks like this is pretty much all there is. What we have on the East Coast, that is way offshore. So this is definitely kind of an anomalous weather regime right now. Yes, let's do the time warp and run things back to yesterday morning, because the convection that we saw over the past day, that's going to be the key to the outlay of mesoscale boundaries. So running that forward, let's do that. You can see that yesterday morning we had these storms in Nebraska. That died off pretty quickly, as we would expect, and then a lot of cells going up during the afternoon in southern Georgia. So I'll stop it there, because that's going to be the dominant MCS that moved sort of southwestward, propagated in that direction into the late night hours. Another thing that kind of stands out is all this activity right there. Obviously, there's some sort of shortwave going over Nevada and Utah. And we run that forward. Man, that's a pretty good MCS there, moving into the northwest Florida region. And then this other MCS moving across the Bitterroot Range into Montana. And that's where it ends up at this hour right there. So other than that, pretty quiet. And I think as the day goes on, we're going to see the usual air mass storms popping up in the southeast. Not so much in Texas because of the influence of all that dry air pouring southward. And then, of course, Florida doing its usual thing. SPC, not showing a whole lot going on. They're focused on that marginal risk right there in the central Rockies, where we very likely have a lot of heat and instability. And you notice that kind of follows the periphery of that subtropical high. So getting a little bit of that upper level flow helping to prolong the storms and tapping into slightly better moisture profiles to the north and the east. This is a good way to visualize things. This is the lapse rate, roughly between 10,000 and 18,000 feet. So this is the mid-level lapse rate. We can see that it's strongest there in Utah. The problem is that's pretty much underneath the subtropical high. This whole area has undergone a lot of subsidence over the past several days, so it's going to be pretty devoid of any moisture. Let's set a sounding right in the middle of that. I guess it's going to be around the Bryce Canyon area, Capitol Reef. And there it is. You can see that very, very steep lapse rate, pretty much dry adiabatic. And you can also see the lack of moisture with dew points in the 20s all the way up. Now, this does give us an inverted V, and it doesn't rule out the possibility of some elevated storms, but they're going to be way up there. That suggests bases up at about 20,000, so I think you're going to be looking at a lot of virga, if anything fires. Now, when you go up to the north, you do get away from those higher lapse rates, but you introduce a little bit more moisture. See those dew points near the 40s at the surface and tapering off to 30s aloft. So that's going to help get the parcels to their LCLs a little bit better, and the basis will be a little bit lower, but it's still kind of elevated. Here's a look across the southwestern U.S. this afternoon. Got that heat low in place across the lower Colorado River Valley there. Temperature's not too extreme, just 106 at Phoenix at this hour, but we do know that, we talked about this yesterday, Death Valley on Sunday, 130 degrees. Let's see what they're doing now. Let's see, 130 down to 127 Monday, 126. Nice cooling trend there. Now that subtropical high is right over them. I wouldn't be surprised if that spiked up just a little bit, but man, look at that low of 104 on Monday. And there's our visible satellite loop. It does look like some debris from some old convection. Where did that come from? Let's take a quick look. We're going to go to the infrared imagery. And if we roll that back, storms forming on the higher terrain of Arizona there, around Flagstaff, and you can see overnight, wow, pretty good MCS there at Kingman. And then the activity at Kingman, that actually rotates around the ridge up to the Reno area. See that right there, how it moves up into central Nevada. And then the stuff at Death Valley, that's coming from development on the Mogollon Rim. So you can certainly use infrared animations to go back 12, 24 hours and find where your cloud material came from. Elsewhere, though, it looks pretty quiet. Looks like some of the usual high-based convection on the mountains, especially in New Mexico and Colorado, and also Utah there. But the subtropical high right there, definitely suppressing things to some extent. And another big problem that we have going on is fires in Northern California, especially around the San Francisco and Sacramento area. It's been reported that 300,000 acres have burned. 367 new fires overnight. And they don't have a full count of how many evacuations that there are yet. So that's kind of an ongoing story there. It's affecting the Napa and Sonoma and Solano wine counties. And we haven't talked about it too much, but Colorado also having wildfire problems of their own. Looking up north, we have this little MCS in the Great Falls, Helena area. That's moved overnight through Idaho into the Bitterroot Range. And that's about it for organized convection, and there's a look at the animation. Depending on how the moisture is, I would probably keep a lookout for moisture on the high plains to interact with that MCS possibly. Let's look at the surface chart. All right, there's the MCS right there. That's still got a ways to go to get to the moisture. You can see 40s dew points all through eastern Montana and even in western North Dakota. So yeah, your 60s are out there, but they're all the way out in Bismarck. So we'll see what happens with that. There could be some nocturnal activity in North Dakota later on. Elsewhere, pretty quiet, and you pretty much have to go up into Alberta to find your polar fronts, but they're up there. You can see the temperature contrast there at Winnipeg. And on the warm sector wing there, thunderstorms already there, and they're being fed by these mid-60s dew points that are flowing towards the northeast. Definitely some cool weather there in the northeast region. 70s and even 60s there in New Hampshire and Vermont. Wow, that would be great about now. The center of the high pressure, yeah, you can definitely see that. Maybe that's shifted east a little bit, but it is in Michigan, and I would classify that as a continental polar air mass. And those dew points, you can see them, 40s with northerly flow. So that's definitely not tropical air by any stretch of the imagination. And with that cold air advection, we've got our cold advection convection. There it is, moving southeastward into New York and New England, all the way down to Pennsylvania, and looks like closer to the tropical air. Some of it is getting kind of vertical around Springfield, Massachusetts, up towards New Hampshire and Portland, Maine. And then getting back into the tropical moisture, we do pick up the convection. Looks like the strongest stuff is from north of Birmingham up to about Asheville and up towards the Charlotte area. And around Jacksonville, some pretty good towers in that area. You can see how this kind of traces out the front that we've got in place, and let me show that to you. And there it is. Yesterday we didn't have any isobars in this area, but now we do, due to this frontal low there around the Birmingham area. And we can see the cyclonic turning of the wind flow. It's very weak, but it is there, and it gives us a center right in that area. And those storms that we saw on the satellite stretching all the way down towards the New Orleans area. So those are being helped a little bit by the convergence along the frontal boundary. And then out in Texas, we can see the effects of the dry air flowing south. 50s dew points coming down into the Lone Star State. And temperatures are just barely getting into the 90s. And then there's the Iowa derecho. I think some of us have forgotten about that, but I think this is going to go down as one of the most significant weather events in the U.S. this year. I want to read this post that I saw on Reddit yesterday by a user named Shells4590. They say, 9 days after the derecho, in my county, more than 40,000 people are still without power. There are people living in homes with trees coming through their ceilings. There are elderly persons who have been trapped in their homes for days. More than 150,000 houses were damaged in the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City corridor. Every single house, apartment, or business has some level of damage in Cedar Rapids. More than 10,000 homes were severely damaged. It's estimated half the trees in the Lynn County area were lost. People just can't go stay in a shelter because COVID. So people are living in tents or living in buildings that are half blown over, or they're sleeping in cars if they still have one. We've had a long string of days that were 85 degrees with high humidity. There's no ice. You cannot find it. At the beginning of the week, if you could get out of town, it was a 45-minute drive to the nearest place with gas, and the lines were miles long. For more than 24 hours, almost all communications were down, and most people were unable to drive or walk anywhere because almost every single street and highway had downed trees and power lines across it. A huge number of people lost all the perishable food that they have. If you have power, you likely do not have internet. FEMA got here yesterday, 8 days after the event. We had little to no warning. The winds lasted more than 30 minutes at 80 to 100 miles an hour. Some areas are believed to have suffered more than 130-mile-an-hour winds. None of this is concentrated in any one place. It looks like this literally everywhere. 4 counties have been devastated, and it will likely be years before we are done with repairs. The lack of prompt response and organization has been nothing short of catastrophic. This will not just blow over. And there's some comments about how the mainstream media is pretty much avoiding the Iowa story, focusing on other stuff. Anyway, I can't really validate all that information, but it sounds like it may be correct, and if so, I want to make sure that information does get out there. So we do have that video from last week, I think from last Tuesday, that covered the derecho. Maybe that was Wednesday or Tuesday, I can't remember which one, but yeah, definitely go back and check that out. That's where some of these radar clips have come from. Okay, that's about all I have for today. I appreciate you all joining us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.